The rhythmic creak of the porch swing was Elias Thorne's constant companion, a familiar protest of aging wood under his slight weight. At 70 years old, with a neat shock of silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that peered from behind wire-rimmed glasses, Elias was a fixture in Cedar Creek, a quaint, sleepy town nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. His small, unassuming house, with its meticulously tended rose bushes and peeling paint, was as modest as the man himself. Few knew, or even bothered to remember, the illustrious career that had once defined him. Elias Thorne, once a celebrated bridge engineer whose designs spanned continents, now lived a life of quiet anonymity, his days marked by solitary walks and an almost obsessive observation of the world around him. He was, to the townsfolk, merely an eccentric old man. They saw him with his worn sketchpad and binoculars, lingering by the river, muttering to himself as if holding a private conversation with the wind. They called him Old Man Thorne, a moniker devoid of malice but rich with dismissal. His reputation was built on his perceived oddities, his preference for silence over chatter, his meticulous notes on local weather patterns, and his unwavering fascination with the Cedar Creek Bridge. The bridge itself was an old steel truss, a venerable, rust-colored behemoth that had spanned the churning waters of the Redwater River for nearly 50 years. Its girders hummed a low, resonant tune in the wind, and its concrete piers, stained green with moss, stood firm against the river's relentless currents. For Elias, this wasn't just a bridge, it was a part of him, a monument to a lifetime of dedication, a silent witness to countless dawns and dusks. He would spend hours by its banks, observing the subtle shifts in the river's flow, the minute vibrations in the steel, the almost imperceptible changes in the concrete. He knew its every rivet, its every stress point, its very soul. It was, in a profound and unspoken way, his legacy. His home reflected his meticulous nature, though in a minimalist fashion. A simple cot served as his bed, a worn armchair his throne, but a sturdy oak desk by the window was piled high with engineering textbooks, historical maps of the region, and bound volumes of his personal technical journals. These journals, filled with precise calculations, intricate diagrams, and a dense, almost cryptographic shorthand, chronicled his most challenging projects. Among them, a thick, leather-bound ledger stood out. Cedar Creek Bridge, Lead Engineer E. Thorne. Its pages contained every stress test, every geological survey, every calculated risk, and every design modification that had gone into the bridge's construction 5 decades ago. It was a testament to a brilliance now hidden from the world, a quietly kept secret of a man who had once shaped landscapes with his intellect. One crisp autumn morning, as Elias was conducting his usual solitary walk near the bridge, a cacophony of adolescent laughter and the grating sound of metal against stone pierced the otherwise peaceful air. He frowned, his sharp eyes narrowing as he approached the source of the noise. A group of teenagers, 3 boys with backpacks and spray paint cans, were gathered around the historical marker near the bridge's entrance. The sign, a weathered wooden plaque, detailed the bridge's construction, its historical significance, and the names of the key figures involved in its creation. One of the boys, a lanky kid with neon green streaks in his hair, was attempting to spray paint a crude caricature over the faded inscription. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Elias's voice, though not loud, carried a surprising authority that made the boys jump. They turned, startled, their expressions shifting from rebellious amusement to annoyed defiance as they recognized Old Man Thorne. "Mind your own business, old man," the lanky kid retorted, brandishing his spray can. "Just having some fun. What's it to you?" The other boys snickered, anticipating the familiar dismissal of an old meddler. Elias, however, didn't scold. He didn't threaten. He simply walked closer, his gaze fixed on the historical marker, his eyes lingering on the faded names, a profound sadness touching his features. "You know," Elias said, his voice softer now, almost wistful, "this isn't just a sign, it's a tribute to the men who poured their sweat and blood into building this bridge." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the teenagers. Do you know what it took to build something like this back then? No fancy machines, no giant cranes for everything, just sheer grit, calloused hands, and a belief that they could conquer the impossible. The boys, initially defiant, found themselves disarmed by his unexpected tone. They had braced for a lecture, a reprimand, not a story. The lanky kid lowered his spray can, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. This river, the Redwater, it's notorious. Elias continued, his voice weaving a narrative. Its currents are fierce, the bedrock unstable in places. People said a bridge couldn't be built here, not one that would last. But a team of engineers, young and old, they dared to dream. They studied the river for years, charted its moods, understood its whispers. They designed foundations that would sink deep into the earth, anchors that would defy the strongest floods. They fought against skepticism, against nature's fury, and against the limits of their own knowledge. He pointed to a specific, almost faded name on the plaque, barely legible. This man, Thomas Riley, he was a foreman. He lost a finger to a faulty cable, but he stayed on the job, supervising the concrete pours, ensuring every batch was perfect. And the chief engineer. He spent nights under this very bridge, just listening, feeling the vibrations, making sure his calculations held true. Elias's eyes gleamed with a distant memory. This bridge isn't just steel and concrete. It's a testament to human ingenuity, to sacrifice, to a quiet kind of heroism that built the very roads you walk on today. The boys were silent now, captivated. They looked at the old sign, then at the sturdy bridge, then back at Elias. The lanky kid, his spray can forgotten, scraped his shoe on the gravel. Wow, he mumbled, a genuine note of surprise in his voice. I never thought about it like that. History isn't just dates and names in a textbook, Elias said, a faint smile touching his lips. It's the sweat on their brows, the calluses on their hands, the pride in their hearts, and it deserves to be respected. He met the lanky kid's gaze, a quiet challenge in his eyes. You don't just deface a sign, you deface a legacy. The boy looked down at his spray can, then back at the historical marker. Without a word, he nudged his friends. Come on, guys, let's go. We got better things to do. They ambled away, but there was a subtle change in their demeanor. No more snickering. No more defiance. They left the sign untouched. Elias watched them go, a small knowing smile on his face. This was his save the cat moment, not a grand heroic gesture, but a quiet, impactful act of preservation and connection. It showcased his deep reverence for history, his innate ability to communicate profound truths, and his fundamental decency, qualities often masked by his reclusive exterior. It was a glimpse of the spirit that had once driven him, the quiet passion that still burned within. The old man Thorne who cared enough to rescue a sign, to inspire a flicker of respect in wayward youth, was far more than the town perceived him to be. And the bridge, his silent companion, stood firm, unknowingly awaiting a crisis that would force its creator back into the light. The tranquil rhythm of Elias Thorne's solitary life was abruptly shattered by the thunderous roar of heavy machinery. The sounds, alien and aggressive, reverberated through Cedar Creek, vibrating through the very foundations of his quiet home. He stepped onto his porch, squinting against the morning sun, and saw the unmistakable signs of a construction site blooming near the Redwater River. Towering cranes clawed at the sky, excavators gnawed at the earth, and a parade of enormous dump trucks rumbled through the town, shaking the very ground beneath his feet. His heart sank. They were replacing his bridge. News of the project had filtered through the town's grapevine weeks ago, vague whispers of modernization and progress. The county council, swayed by an ambitious real estate developer named Sterling Global, and their grand vision for a sprawling new riverside complex, had approved the demolition of the old Cedar Creek Bridge. Its replacement, a sleek, modern concrete structure, was touted as a symbol of Cedar Creek's future, capable of handling increased traffic flow. The lead contractor, Apex Solutions, was a rising star in regional infrastructure, known for their aggressive timelines and cost-cutting measures. Their site foreman, Brandon Miller, was a young, sharp-suited man with an almost palpable aura of self-importance, a stark contrast to the seasoned, unassuming engineers Elias had known. Brandon believed the old bridge was an eyesore, a relic holding back the town's potential. Driven by an instinct he couldn't ignore, Elias found himself drawn to the construction site like a moth to a flame. He knew the old bridge intimately, every stress point, every geological quirk of the Redwater riverbed. As he observed Brandon and his crew, a chill of unease began to creep over him. They were moving with a reckless efficiency, a blatant disregard for established protocols. His experienced eye immediately picked up on glaring inconsistencies. The work began with the demolition of the old access roads and auxiliary structures. Explosions, carefully controlled but still jarring, sent shockwaves through the valley, rattling the windows of Elias's home a mile away. Then came the excavation for the new bridge's foundation. Gigantic excavators tore into the riverbank, their steel claws ripping through layers of earth and rock. It was the foundation work that truly alarmed Elias. He watched, aghast, as Brandon's crew began to dismantle sections of the old bridge's concrete piers. Not just the visible superstructure, but parts of the original, deep-set pilings that Elias knew were critical. He remembered, with vivid clarity, the immense challenges of laying those original foundations almost 5 decades ago. The Redwater River, deceptively placid on the surface, concealed a treacherous bedrock profile, a complex interplay of shale, limestone, and ancient fault lines that required bespoke engineering solutions. He had spent months, even years, charting the riverbed, using nascent sonar technology and manual borings to understand its subterranean secrets. The original pilings, sunk far deeper than visually apparent, were designed to anchor into stable granite seams, bypassing pockets of unstable clay and subterranean springs. He had developed a unique, almost proprietary method of reinforced concrete casing and deep-set friction piles to ensure the bridge's long-term stability against the river's unpredictable moods and potential seismic activity common in the region. But Brandon's crew, in their haste, were smashing through these vital original pilings, not just removing the visible parts, but causing structural damage below the waterline. They were drilling new, shallower pilings, clearly opting for a faster, cheaper method that ignored the complex geological realities of the riverbed. Elias could almost feel the bridge's silent protest, the delicate balance of its original engineering being brutally disrupted. He watched Brandon, a clipboard in hand, barking orders, his face a mask of impatient efficiency. The foreman's movements were sharp, decisive, but lacked the nuanced understanding of a true craftsman, of someone who respected the ground beneath their feet. Brandon seemed to view the earth as an enemy to be conquered, rather than a force to be understood and accommodated. Elias could almost hear his unspoken thoughts. Old bridge, old ways. My way is faster, better, modern. A fierce internal conflict raged within Elias. His natural inclination, honed by years of retirement, was to observe, to remain detached. He knew the contempt that greeted an old man's unsolicited advice on a modern construction site. He had experienced it before in his career, the dismissive sneers of younger, ambitious engineers who saw his meticulousness as a sign of slowness, his caution as a lack of boldness. That old pain, the fear of being seen as irrelevant, resurfaced. He pictured Brandon's patronizing smile, the eye rolls of the young crew. The thought made his stomach clench. But then, another image superimposed itself over the anticipated humiliation, the sleek, modern bridge, collapsing into the churning Redwater, perhaps with cars, with people, with children, plummeting into the icy depths. He saw the integrity of his life's work being desecrated, its very purpose, public safety, being jeopardized by ignorance and arrogance. The memories of countless sleepless nights spent perfecting calculations. The painstaking care he had poured into ensuring the old bridge's enduring strength welled up within him. This was more than just a structural flaw. It was a moral failing, a betrayal of the engineering principles he held sacred. His hesitation, born of fear, vanished. This wasn't just about his past. It was about the present, about lives that would be endangered. He couldn't stand by and watch his legacy be demolished, both literally and figuratively, in such a reckless manner. The quiet life he had built, his sanctuary of reflection and observation, felt utterly insignificant compared to the looming disaster. Brandon's crew, with another jarring clang of metal on concrete, completely severed a critical section of the original West Pier's anchor pilings. Elias felt a phantom tremor, as if the riverbed itself cried out in protest. That particular piling, he knew, was crucial for distributing dynamic loads from the current. Without it, or with it improperly replaced, the new bridge would be fatally compromised. He knew, with chilling certainty, that he could not simply return to his porch swing. This was his point of no return. The knowledge he possessed, the warnings that screamed in his mind, demanded action. He had built that bridge. He knew its every secret, its every vulnerability. And now, he had witnessed its new builders ignorantly introduce a catastrophic flaw. He had to speak. He had to intervene. No matter how much they scoffed, no matter how much they dismissed him as a senile old man. The silence of Cedar Creek, once his refuge, now felt like a complicit quiet. And Elias Thorne, the forgotten legend, was about to break it. The scent of damp earth and freshly cut concrete hung heavy in the air as Elias Thorne approached the perimeter of the Cedar Creek Bridge construction site. The morning sun, usually a gentle balm, felt harsh against his weathered face, highlighting the determined set of his jaw. He moved with a quiet intensity, his gaze fixed on Brandon Miller, the foreman whose figure, radiating an aura of confident authority, stood near a roaring concrete mixer. This was not a casual stroll. This was a confrontation long suppressed, now unavoidable. Brandon Miller, a man in his late 30s, possessed the kind of physique sculpted by physical labor and an almost aggressive self-assurance. His safety vest, impeccably clean, stretched taut across his broad chest, and his hard hat seemed to sit with a permanent tilt of superiority. He barked orders into a two-way radio, his voice sharp and impatient, cutting through the din of machinery. To him, the construction site was a battlefield to be conquered, deadlines enemies to be vanquished, and old men offering unsolicited advice. Just another obstacle. As Elias stepped closer, navigating around stacks of rebar and mounds of excavated earth, Brandon finally noticed him. He frowned, his eyes, the color of cold steel, narrowing with annoyance. He recognized Elias from his frequent, quiet loitering near the old bridge, the eccentric old man who seemed to have nothing better to do than watch concrete dry. "Can I help you, old-timer?" Brandon asked, his voice laced with thinly veiled condescension, his hand resting on his hip. He didn't wait for an answer. "This is an active construction zone. Hard hats and safety vests required. You need to clear out. It's for your own safety." Elias ignored the dismissive tone. His gaze was fixed on the newly poured concrete foundations, still gleaming wet, and the remaining sections of the old piers that Brandon's crew were preparing to demolish. He saw the subtle, almost imperceptible sheen of water seeping from a fissure near the base of one of the new pilings, a critical detail that screamed subterranean spring to his trained eye. "Foreman Miller," Elias began, his voice calm, clear, cutting through the noise. "My name is Elias Thorne. I'm here because I have serious concerns about the foundation work for this new bridge." Brandon let out a short, derisive laugh. "Concerns from you? Look, no offense, Grandpa, but we're building a state-of-the-art bridge here. We've got engineers, blueprints, all the fancy tech. We don't need unsolicited advice from sidewalk superintendents." He gestured vaguely towards the riverbank. Go enjoy the view, if you want. Just stay off my sight. It's not just a view, young man, Elias retorted, a spark of indignation in his eyes. And it's not unsolicited advice. It's a warning. This river, the Redwater, is deceptively complex. The bedrock, particularly on the west bank, has pockets of highly unstable shale and a network of subterranean springs. My calculations, from 50 years ago, demanded pilings be driven to a minimum depth of 80 feet, anchored into the stable granite layer. Anything less, and you're building on quicksand. He pointed a trembling finger at the new pilings. Those new pilings you're setting in, they look like they're barely going 40. And you're compromising the original pilings, the deep-set ones that are holding back that hydrostatic pressure. You're inviting disaster. Brandon's smile twisted into a sneer. 50 years ago, buddy. Engineering has advanced a bit since the horse and buggy era. We have seismic sensors, ground-penetrating radar. We know what we're doing. Your calculations are probably in some dusty old ledger, not applicable to modern techniques. He puffed out his chest. We're Apex Solutions. We build bridges that stand. And we do it efficiently, on budget, and on time. Not at the snail's pace of the last century. His eyes were condescending, his posture radiating a smug dismissal. He saw Elias as a relic, a man clinging to outdated ideas, envious of modern progress. Elias felt a surge of frustration, hot and bitter. How could such arrogance be so blind? He needed to make Brandon understand the gravity of his words. The old bridge, Elias said, his voice lowering, imbued with a quiet power. It stands because of those original deep pilings. I designed them. I supervised every single pour, every drill. I spent months mapping this riverbed. I developed a unique concrete mix, reinforced with a steel mesh pattern that accounted for the specific lateral forces of the Redwater's current during flood season. He looked directly at Brandon, his eyes piercing. You're not just demolishing a structure, you're dismantling a carefully engineered solution to a very unique geological challenge. You're cutting corners on the very foundation, and that will lead to catastrophic failure. Unbeknownst to Brandon, a young worker, Jake Riley had paused his work nearby, ostensibly wiping sweat from his brow, but his ears were intently tuned to the exchange. Jake was a recent technical school graduate, new to Apex Solutions, and unlike Brandon, he possessed a genuine curiosity for the intricacies of civil engineering. He was quiet, unassuming, with a thoughtful gaze that took in details. He had noticed the unusual seepage near the new pilings, too, a minor anomaly that nagged at him. He listened as Elias spoke of depths, pressures, and specialized concrete, words that resonated with the theoretical knowledge he was trying to apply in the field. He saw the genuine concern in Elias's eyes, not the rambling of a lunatic. Jake was a potential ally, a silent observer whose respect for competence transcended the site's pecking order. Brandon, however, saw none of this. His face flushed with irritation. He wasn't about to be lectured by some old man. Look, Mr. Thorne, or whatever your name is, Brandon snapped, his voice now openly hostile. I've had enough. You're trespassing, you're disrupting my crew, and you're spreading unsubstantiated nonsense. This project is on a tight schedule. We don't have time for conspiracy theories from armchair engineers. I'm telling you, for the last time, leave this site. Or I'll have security escort you off, and I'll file a complaint with the county. He took a step closer, towering over Elias, his arms crossed, a clear challenge in his stance. He was not just dismissing Elias, he was asserting his dominance, publicly humiliating the old man to reinforce his authority over his crew. As if to punctuate his dismissal, Brandon turned to a heavy-duty excavator nearby. All right, boys, let's get this done. Level out that old concrete. We're pouring new pilings in 30. Get to it. His voice boomed, a deliberate act of defiance against Elias's warnings. The excavator roared to life, its massive steel bucket swinging towards a section of the old foundation that Elias had just warned was critical. Elias watched, helpless, a profound sense of despair washing over him. His words, his lifetime of knowledge, his desperate plea for safety, had been utterly disregarded. The roar of the machinery seemed to mock him, drowning out the silent scream of the bridge's compromised integrity. He felt a familiar, bitter taste in his mouth, the taste of being unheard, of being dismissed by arrogance and short-sighted ambition. But this time, the stakes were infinitely higher. He knew, with absolute certainty, what would happen if Brandon continued down this path. He had to find another way. He couldn't let his creation, and the lives it was meant to protect, be destroyed by ignorance. The roar of the excavator, intentionally amplified by Brandon Miller's command, was a deafening punctuation mark to his dismissal of Elias Thorne. Elias stood there, rooted to the spot, a profound sense of helplessness washing over him. The ground beneath his feet vibrated with the heavy machinery, a jarring counterpoint to the quiet precision of his own engineering mind. He had presented irrefutable facts, born from a lifetime of intimate knowledge of this very river, and they had been met with arrogance and a stubborn refusal to listen. He knew, with a chilling certainty that resonated deep in his bones, that Brandon's shortcuts were not merely compromising the bridge's longevity, they were inviting catastrophic failure. The new, shallower pilings, drilled without regard for the underlying geological complexities Elias had so painstakingly mapped, were a ticking time bomb. The indiscriminate demolition of the original, deeper anchors further exacerbated the problem, destabilizing the very bedrock the new structure relied upon. Elias could almost hear the bridge groaning in silent protest, its integrity being methodically undermined, driven by a desperate urgency. Elias spent the rest of the day attempting to contact anyone who would listen. He called the county planning office, the public works department, even the mayor's office. Each call was met with polite but firm resistance. "Mr. Thorne, we've reviewed the Apex Solutions proposals. They are fully compliant with modern codes. Our engineers have signed off on the plans. Sir, Brandon Miller is a highly reputable foreman. We trust Apex Solutions' expertise. They assure us the project is on schedule and within budget, with all safety protocols observed." The official voices were smooth, reassuring, and utterly deaf to his warnings. They were insulated by paperwork, by corporate assurances, and by an unwavering belief in progress. Elias was just an old man, a dissenting voice against the narrative of efficiency and modernity. He was utterly alone in his frantic efforts to avert disaster. The true arena for Elias's desperate fight was not a courtroom or a council meeting. It was the construction site itself. The old Cedar Creek Bridge, the very structure he had painstakingly brought to life, stood as a stark symbol of the conflict between true engineering dedication and reckless ambition. He had poured his intellect, his passion, and decades of meticulous labor into its creation. Now, it was being undone by ignorance and a misplaced faith in speed over stability. As dusk painted the western sky in hues of orange and purple, Elias returned to the bridge. The construction crew had packed up for the night, leaving behind a landscape of dormant machinery and freshly disturbed earth. A biting wind whipped off the Redwater River, carrying the scent of damp soil and metal. Elias moved like a shadow, his familiar worn hiking boots barely disturbing the loose gravel. He knew this ground intimately, every dip and rise, every subtle change in elevation. He had walked these banks thousands of times, charting the river's moods, studying its geological secrets. His mission was clear: find undeniable proof. He needed tangible evidence of Brandon's negligence, something beyond his own uncorroborated warnings. He carefully made his way to the partially demolished western pier, the very section Brandon's crew had so recklessly attacked. The sounds of the river, usually a soothing murmur, now felt ominous, its currents tugging insistently at the damaged foundations. Elias pulled out a powerful flashlight from his worn backpack, its beam cutting through the gloom. He meticulously scanned the exposed concrete of the original pilings. And there, it was a fresh, jagged crack, spiderwebbing across a section of reinforced concrete he knew should have remained intact. It wasn't superficial, it was deep, extending downwards, a direct consequence of the nearby excavation. He ran a gloved hand over the fissure, feeling the rough edges, the undeniable evidence of structural compromise. He recognized the pattern of failure, the telltale signs of stress being transferred to compromised sections. He saw other subtle indicators: too disturbed rebar that had been cut rather than carefully extracted, fresh erosion marks around new, shallower pilings, indicating inadequate sealing against water ingress. Brandon's hurried approach had literally opened fissures in the ground. Elias pulled out his ancient, leather-bound engineering journal, its pages filled with precise sketches and calculations. Under the beam of his flashlight, he began to make meticulous notes, cross-referencing his observations with the detailed blueprints from decades ago. He sketched the new cracks, measured their approximate length and depth, and noted the exact locations of compromised rebar. He recorded the unsettling seepage of water near the new pilings, a clear sign of hydrostatic pressure building against an insufficient barrier. The cold, analytical part of his mind worked with grim efficiency, documenting the impending disaster. As he worked, a distant rumble echoed through the valley. Elias looked up, his gaze sweeping the darkened sky. Heavy, oppressive clouds, thick and bruised, were rolling in from the west. The air grew heavy, charged with an almost palpable electricity. The weather forecast, which he had checked religiously, had predicted a significant storm, heavy rains, high winds, and a potential for flash flooding. A chilling realization washed over him. The storm wasn't just bad weather, it was a devastating accelerant. Heavy rainfall would rapidly increase the Redwater River's flow, multiplying the lateral pressure on the already compromised foundations. The weakened bedrock, already under stress, would be further saturated, losing its meager stability. The pressure increased exponentially. He had perhaps hours, not days, before the forces of nature would find the weak points Brandon had so carelessly created. The ticking clock, once a distant abstraction, now pounded in his ears like a frantic drum. He had to warn people. He had to stop traffic on the bridge, if only for a few hours, to give it a chance to survive the storm, to give the authorities a final, desperate chance to listen. But how he was just an old man, dismissed, ignored. No one would believe him now, not with a storm bearing down and the bridge looking outwardly complete enough to carry traffic. He felt a deep tremor run through the old bridge itself, a subtle vibration that was more than just the wind. It was a cry, a silent scream of impending doom. He clutched his journal to his chest, the weight of its truth a heavy burden. The impending storm, the compromised foundation, the blind arrogance of Brandon Miller. It was a perfect, terrible storm, converging on his life's work. Elias Thorne, the forgotten architect, was now locked in a desperate race against time, against human folly, and against the very forces of nature he had once so meticulously mastered. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the morning light would either bring vindication or unimaginable tragedy. The morning of the storm dawned with an ominous, bruised sky, reflecting the turmoil brewing within Elias Thorne. Rain, initially a gentle drizzle, quickly escalated into a relentless downpour, drumming a furious rhythm on his roof and turning the Redwater River into a churning, muddy torrent. The wind howled through the valley, stripping leaves from trees and rattling every pane of glass in Elias's small home. Each gust felt like a personal assault, an amplification of the impending disaster he knew was unfolding at the bridge. Sleep had been impossible. Elias had spent the night poring over his old journals, cross-referencing his original blueprints with the damning observations he had made on Brandon Miller's work. The meticulous details, the precise calculations, the unique geological challenges of the Redwater River, they screamed a single, undeniable truth. The new foundations were catastrophically compromised. The rising river, swollen by the torrential rain, would find every weak point, every corner cut, every disregarded warning. An overwhelming dread settled in Elias's stomach. He knew the specific vulnerabilities of that west pier, the subtle shifts in bedrock that required its unique, deep-set design. Brandon's careless excavation and shallow new pilings had stripped away the very safeguards Elias had engineered 5 decades ago. He envisioned the hydrostatic pressure building, the unstable shale giving way, the entire structure groaning under a stress it was never designed to bear. Driven by a desperate urgency, Elias grabbed his worn rain slicker and his sturdy walking stick. He had to go to the bridge. He had to witness it, not out of morbid curiosity, but out of a profound sense of responsibility, a desperate hope that he could still do something, anything, to prevent a tragedy. The short walk to the Cedar Creek Bridge felt like a journey through a maelstrom. The gravel road was rapidly becoming a muddy creek, and the wind threatened to tear the slicker from his grasp. As he approached the riverbank, the roaring of the Redwater was deafening, a furious bellow of unleashed power. The river, normally a wide but contained flow, had burst its banks, swallowing the low-lying sections of the construction site. Scaffolding lay twisted in the churning water, and the partially completed concrete framework of the new bridge loomed like a skeletal giant against the gray, turbulent sky. Even from a distance, Elias could see the signs. The new concrete foundations, still partially exposed, showed fresh, dark cracks spiderwebbing across their surface, bleeding muddy water. The ground around the pilings was visibly saturated, turning into a treacherous swamp. He heard it then, a low, grinding moan, a sound of immense stress emanating from the core of the bridge. It was the tortured groan of stressed steel and fracturing concrete, a sound that only an engineer, intimately familiar with such structures, could truly interpret as the lament of a failing build. His heart pounded with a frantic rhythm. This was it. The culmination of Brandon Miller's arrogance and the county's blindness. Elias desperately scanned the approach roads. Despite the storm, traffic was still attempting to cross the old bridge, which was still in use while the new one was under construction. Commuters, bundled in rain gear, drove their cars cautiously across the familiar span, oblivious to the silent scream of the structure beneath them. Then, in the distance, Elias saw it, a familiar yellow shape, a school bus, slowly approaching the bridge, its headlights cutting weak beams through the downpour. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He had to warn them. He had to stop them. But he was just an old man on the side of a flooded road, his voice lost in the wind and the roar of the river. He waved his arms frantically, shouting, but his voice was swallowed by the storm. The bus continued its slow, inexorable approach. He saw the bus driver, focused on the treacherous conditions, glance briefly at him, dismissively, before turning his attention back to the road. "Stop the bridge, it's collapsing!" Elias screamed, his throat raw, tears mingling with the rain on his face. He scrambled onto a small, muddy rise, desperate to be seen, to be heard. He felt the ground tremble beneath his feet, a deep, resonant vibration. The new bridge, the one Brandon Miller had rushed to build, began to groan louder, a metallic shriek tearing through the air. A massive section of the concrete decking, not yet fully integrated, suddenly shifted with a sickening lurch. Dust, mixed with concrete fragments, exploded upwards. Steel rebar, exposed and twisted, groaned like tormented beasts. Then came the roar. It wasn't just a sound. It was a visceral force that slammed into Elias, vibrating through his very bones. The air filled with the terrifying symphony of destruction, the deafening crack of fracturing concrete, the high-pitched shriek of tearing steel, the deep, thunderous boom of massive sections collapsing into the churning river below. The ground bucked violently. Elias staggered, fighting to stay upright, his eyes fixed on the unfolding catastrophe, the Cedar Creek Bridge, the very symbol of his life's work. The structure he had poured his soul into, buckled, its graceful arch twisted into a grotesque, jagged ruin. Steel girders, once mighty, snapped like brittle twigs, raining debris into the swollen river. Concrete piers, undermined and weakened, crumbled into dust and jagged chunks, sending enormous plumes of water and spray high into the air. The river, ravenous, swallowed the collapsing mass with a hungry roar. In a terrifying, slow-motion ballet of destruction, the central span of the new bridge, still incomplete but connected to the now compromised foundations, tore itself apart. It twisted, groaned, and then, with a final, deafening shriek, plunged into the churning depths of the Redwater River, sending a colossal wave crashing over the banks. Elias watched, heartbroken, as his life's monumental achievement, and its hastily built successor, vanished beneath the turbulent waters. The once proud structure was reduced to a tangled mass of twisted steel and shattered concrete, a tragic testament to arrogance and oversight. Miraculously, the school bus, alerted at the last moment by a frantic honk from a passing utility truck driver who had seen the initial tremors, managed to screech to a halt just before the old bridge's approach completely gave way. No one was seriously injured, but the scene was one of chaos and terror. Car alarms blared, people screamed, and the emergency services, their sirens wailing, began to converge on the site, their flashing lights painting grim strokes across the rain-swept landscape. The news of the bridge collapse spread like wildfire, a local tragedy that quickly erupted into a national headline. Initial reports spoke of unforeseen weather conditions and structural fatigue. Apex Solutions immediately issued a press release, blaming the unprecedented storm and the age of the original infrastructure. Brandon Miller, his face pale and grim, gave interviews filled with carefully crafted statements about safety protocols and unforeseen natural forces. They launched an internal investigation, a thinly veiled attempt to control the narrative and deflect blame. But Elias Thorne knew the truth. He stood on the muddy bank, soaked to the bone, watching the wreckage, the silent lament of his masterpiece echoing in his ears. He was a witness, a prophet unheeded, and now, the sole keeper of the truth. The bridge had screamed its warning, and no one had listened. Now, it lay broken, its secrets submerged, waiting for its true architect to finally speak. The immediate aftermath of the Cedar Creek Bridge collapse was a cacophony of sirens, flashing emergency lights, and the grim faces of responders. The air, heavy with rain and the smell of fractured concrete, hummed with a palpable sense of shock and confusion. Initial media reports, echoed by official statements from Apex Solutions and the county, swiftly attributed the disaster to unforeseen extreme weather and material fatigue of the aging original structure. Brandon Miller, his face a carefully composed mask of concern, was quick to appear on local news, offering condolences and assurances of full cooperation, deftly deflecting any hint of culpability. He spoke with the practiced ease of someone trained in crisis management, subtly shifting the blame to an act of nature. But Elias Thorne knew the truth. He watched the spectacle from a distance, a lone figure in the swirling rain, his heart heavy with vindication, yet aching with the profound sadness of what could have been prevented. He clutched his waterlogged engineering journal, its pages filled with the damning evidence of Brandon's negligence and his own forewarnings. He was the only one who truly understood the language of that collapsed bridge, the silent testimony of its ruined foundations. Days turned into a week. A joint state and federal investigation was swiftly launched, driven by the sheer scale of the collapse and the public outcry. Experts descended upon Cedar Creek, their faces grim as they surveyed the twisted wreckage. Brandon Miller and Apex Solutions continued their campaign of deflection, presenting carefully manicured reports that emphasized the storm's severity and subtly implied the original bridge's inherent weaknesses. They tried to paint Elias, if he was mentioned at all, as an eccentric local, his warnings dismissed as the ramblings of an elderly layperson. However, not everyone was willing to accept the convenient narrative. Jake Riley, the young Apex Solutions worker who had quietly observed Elias's initial confrontation with Brandon, found himself increasingly unsettled. He remembered Elias's precise technical explanations, the subtle signs of foundation issues he himself had noticed. The official story didn't sit right with him. He had seen the shortcuts, the rushed work, and felt a growing unease in his gut. Simultaneously, a tenacious young investigative journalist from the Charleston Chronicle, Sarah Chen, had arrived in Cedar Creek. Sarah was known for her relentless pursuit of truth, often digging deeper than the official press releases allowed. She found the unforeseen weather excuse a little too convenient. She began interviewing locals, and Elias Thorne's name kept coming up, first as the eccentric old man, then, intriguingly, as someone who had warned them. Sarah's journalistic instincts flared. She sought out Elias, finding him quietly sketching at his kitchen table, surrounded by his old engineering texts. "Mr. Thorne," Sarah began, her voice earnest. "My name is Sarah Chen. I'm investigating the bridge collapse. People say you tried to warn the construction crew. Is that true?" Elias looked at her, his eyes, usually veiled, now piercingly direct. He saw the sincerity in her gaze, the genuine hunger for truth that resonated with his own integrity. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly nodded, pushing his old journal across the table. "They didn't listen," he said, his voice raspy. "They called me a senile old man. But the bridge, it didn't just collapse because of the storm, Miss Chen. It collapsed because its very foundations were sabotaged." Sarah listened, her eyes widening. As Elias meticulously detailed his observations, the compromised pilings, the ignored geological data, the inadequate concrete pours, he spoke with the precision of an engineer, the passion of a craftsman, and the quiet pain of a prophet unheeded. She recognized the depth of his knowledge, far beyond that of a casual observer. Days later, Elias found himself summoned to the federal inquiry. The hearing room was cold, sterile, dominated by a long table where a panel of high-ranking engineers and government officials sat, their faces grave. Brandon Miller, accompanied by a phalanx of lawyers from Apex Solutions, sat on the opposite side, an air of forced confidence about him. The room bristled with skepticism when Elias Thorne, dressed in his modest, well-worn suit, stepped forward to testify. "Mr. Thorne," the lead investigator, a stern-faced woman named Director Hayes, began, her tone neutral. "You claim to have warned Foreman Miller about structural flaws. Can you provide any concrete evidence to substantiate these claims?" "Yes, ma'am. I can," Elias replied, his voice calm, projecting into the hushed room. He placed his leather-bound journal on the table before him. "But first, I believe it's important for this panel to understand why I know what I know." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, settling briefly on Brandon Miller, whose jaw tightened. "My name is Elias Thorne. 50 years ago, I was the lead engineer for the original Cedar Creek Bridge project. I designed that bridge. I oversaw every single phase of its construction." A ripple went through the room. Whispers erupted. The eccentric old man was not just a witness. He was the bridge's original architect, a living legend, albeit one long forgotten. Brandon Miller's carefully constructed composure began to crack, his face draining of color. His lawyers exchanged frantic glances. Julian Thorne, who had meticulously documented the findings at Eleanor's home earlier this year, knew of the dramatic effect such revelations could have. Elias continued, his voice steady, commanding attention. "When I designed the Cedar Creek Bridge, I faced unique geological challenges. The Redwater Riverbed, particularly on the west bank, is riddled with unstable shale and active subterranean springs. My team and I spent years charting these anomalies, developing a proprietary deep piling system, 80 feet deep, anchored into solid granite, specifically to bypass these weak points and withstand extreme hydrological pressures." He opened his journal, its pages filled with meticulous hand-drawn schematics, complex equations, and detailed field notes. "This is my original design log. You'll find detailed calculations for the reinforced concrete mix, the lateral load distribution, and the precise depth and placement of every pile." He pointed to a specific drawing. What Foreman Miller's crew did was to recklessly remove these critical original anchors, replacing them with shallower, inadequate pilings. They breached the integrity of my original design, ignoring the very geological realities that necessitate such deep foundations. He then projected a series of photographs Sarah Chen had helped him prepare photos of the new cracks he had observed, the disturbed rebar, the water seepage around the compromised pilings. These are my observations from the night before the collapse, direct evidence of the structural damage caused by their hasty excavation. These cracks, he pointed to a particularly jagged fissure, are not due to weather. They are a direct result of improper foundation work, of building on unstable ground, and of a catastrophic failure to understand the fundamental physics of this river. As Elias spoke, independent structural engineers on the panel leaned forward, their faces etched with growing realization. They recognized the brilliance in his original designs, the foresight and meticulousness that had allowed the old bridge to stand for so long. They cross-referenced his notes with their own preliminary findings from the wreckage, and the pieces of the puzzle began to click into place. Elias's testimony was not just anecdotal, it was forensic, precise, and utterly damning. Brandon Miller, initially defiant, slowly deflated. His bravado vanished, replaced by a desperate, panicked pallor. He tried to interrupt, to object, but his lawyers, recognizing the devastating blow being dealt to their case, quieted him. He watched, aghast, as Elias, the old man he had scorned, systematically dismantled his entire defense, exposing his negligence with calm, unassailable logic. The media, reporting live from the hearing, broadcast Elias's testimony nationwide. The public, who had previously accepted the act of God narrative, was stunned. Their initial skepticism turned to outrage against Apex Solutions, and then, slowly, to a profound, swelling admiration for Elias Thorne, the forgotten hero. Social media exploded with tributes to the Bridge Whisperer and calls for accountability. Elias, once a mere eccentric old man, was being transformed, before the eyes of the nation, into a living legend. His decades of quiet dedication finally brought into the searing light of public vindication. The true architects of the tragedy, Brandon's arrogance and Apex's corporate greed, were unequivocally exposed, and the stage was set for justice. The air in the federal inquiry courtroom, once thick with the tension of accusation and defense, was now charged with a different kind of energy, the quiet hum of justice unfolding. Elias Thorne's testimony had been a seismic event, not just for the legal proceedings, but for Cedar Creek, and indeed, for the wider engineering community. The meticulous detail of his journals, combined with his unwavering composure and the simple, undeniable truth of his forgotten legacy, left no room for doubt. Brandon Miller, once the picture of arrogant self-assurance, sat slumped at the defense table, his face ashen. The legal team from Apex Solutions, their expressions grim, knew their carefully constructed defense had crumbled. The act of God narrative had been exposed as a flimsy veil over gross negligence and blatant disregard for safety. The evidence was overwhelming, and Elias's revelation as the original lead engineer transformed what might have been dismissed as an old man's grievances into the damning testimony of a master craftsman whose work had been desecrated. The legal fallout was swift and severe. Brandon Miller and several key Apex Solutions executives faced multiple felony charges, including criminal negligence and endangerment. The ensuing civil lawsuits against Apex Solutions were astronomical, threatening to bankrupt the once rising construction firm. Their reputation was annihilated, their licenses revoked. Brandon Miller lost everything: his career, his considerable salary, and the inflated sense of self-importance that had fueled his recklessness. His downfall was complete, a direct consequence of his hubris and his willingness to sacrifice safety for profit. In Cedar Creek, the immediate ripple effect was palpable. The county commissioner, Marcus Thorne, no relation to Elias, who had championed the Apex Solutions project and dismissed Elias's earlier warnings, found himself facing a storm of public outrage. He had initially tried to maintain a facade of regret, but Sarah Chen's investigative reporting, meticulously detailing his office's dismissal of Elias's calls and emails, exposed his office's culpability. At a tense town hall meeting, televised statewide, Commissioner Thorne, a man known for his polished speeches, stood before a hostile crowd. His face was drawn, his usual confident posture replaced by a defeated slump. He publicly addressed Elias. "Mr. Thorne," Commissioner Thorne said, his voice strained, "on behalf of Cedar Creek and the county government, I offer my profoundest apologies. Our office, in its pursuit of modernization and efficiency, tragically overlooked the wisdom of experience. We placed our trust in a company that betrayed it, and in doing so, we failed to listen to the very man who had built our community's trust, brick by painstaking brick." He paused, his gaze meeting Elias's, now filled with genuine remorse. "We were arrogant. We were wrong. And we nearly paid the ultimate price for it. We owe you, Elias, a debt that can never be fully repaid. Your integrity, your unwavering commitment to safety, has saved us from an even greater tragedy." He vowed to overhaul the county's infrastructure oversight, prioritizing experienced counsel and thorough vetting over expediency. The public apology, a humbling moment for the powerful commissioner, was a turning point. It marked the public vindication Elias had unknowingly sought for decades, a recognition that transcended mere accolades. Opportunities, once scorned, now poured in. The State Department of Transportation approached Elias, offering him a lifetime position as a senior consulting engineer for all major infrastructure projects. It was a role tailored to his unique expertise, allowing him to review blueprints, conduct on-site evaluations, and advise on complex engineering challenges. It was not just a job, it was a chance to finally wield his knowledge for the public good, to ensure that no more bridges fell due to negligence. This opportunity provided not only financial stability, but also a profound sense of purpose, allowing him to leave a lasting legacy. And Elias was not alone. Jake Riley, the young Apex Solutions worker, inspired by Elias's integrity, left the disgraced company immediately after the collapse. He sought out Elias, humble and eager to learn. "Mr. Thorne," Jake said, his eyes earnest, "I saw what happened. I heard you. I want to learn from you. I want to build things that last, with honesty, not just speed." Elias, seeing the genuine spark of dedication in Jake, took him under his wing, accepting him as his first and most devoted apprentice. Jake spent countless hours poring over Elias's old journals, shadowing him on site visits, absorbing every lesson. Sarah Chen, the journalist, became more than just a reporter. She became Elias's friend and trusted chronicler, capturing his story, his philosophy, and his renewed impact on the world. She wrote a best-selling book, The Bridge Whisperer, detailing his life, the collapse, and his triumphant vindication, ensuring his legacy would be known far and wide. One warm afternoon, months after the chaos had subsided, Elias and Jake sat by the now-repaired banks of the Redwater River. The wreckage of the collapsed bridge had been painstakingly cleared, and the initial work on a new, redesigned Cedar Creek Bridge was underway, this time with Elias Thorne as the lead consultant. The river flowed calmly, its surface reflecting the clear blue sky. "You know, Jake," Elias began, his gaze fixed on the meticulous, deep pilings being drilled into the riverbed, following his original, proven designs. "A bridge isn't just about steel and concrete. It's about trust. The trust that people place in the engineers, in the builders, to get it right, to make it safe, to withstand the test of time and the fury of nature." Jake nodded, absorbing every word. Brandon. He only saw the numbers, the deadlines. He saw profit. Jake, Elias corrected gently. And ego. He didn't see the lives that would cross that bridge. He didn't see the river's true character, or the ground beneath. He didn't respect the forces he was trying to conquer. Elias paused, a thoughtful expression on his face. Life has a way of testing us, of humbling us. For a long time, I let resentment fester. I let the past silence me. But that bridge, it forced me to speak again. It reminded me that the true value of knowledge isn't in what you accumulate, but in what you share, in what you protect. He looked at Jake, a rare, warm smile gracing his lips. And the experience, it taught me that humility is the strongest foundation of all. To listen, truly listen, to the warnings, no matter how small, no matter who they come from. Because sometimes, the most important truths are spoken in whispers, or by an old bridge. Their quiet conversation, under the vast, open sky, was a testament to lessons learned, to trust rebuilt, and to a legacy that would now stand strong for generations to come. 3 years had passed since the tragic collapse of the Cedar Creek Bridge and the subsequent vindication of Elias Thorne. Cedar Creek, once a small town on the brink of disaster, was now a quiet testament to resilience and renewed trust. The scars of the collapse had faded, replaced by the rising, elegant arches of a new, state-of-the-art Cedar Creek Bridge. This time, its construction was a testament to meticulous planning, cutting-edge technology, and, most importantly, the profound wisdom of its original architect. Elias Thorne was no longer the eccentric old man who wandered the riverbanks. He was a revered figure, a living legend in the world of civil engineering. His name was spoken with respect in academic circles and whispered with gratitude among the residents of Cedar Creek. He still lived in his modest house, its porch swing still creaking gently in the evening breeze. But his life was now full, meaningful, and deeply connected to the world he had once retreated from. His role as senior consulting engineer for the State Department of Transportation kept him active and engaged. He traveled less, preferring to work from his home office, reviewing blueprints, offering insights, and mentoring a new generation of engineers who sought his counsel. His most dedicated protege, Jake Riley, had flourished under his tutelage. Jake, now a confident and skilled engineer, often visited Elias, their discussions ranging from the intricate mechanics of long-span bridges to the ethical responsibilities of building for public safety. But Elias's most enduring legacy was the Thorne Legacy Foundation, established with a significant portion of the financial settlement from Apex Solutions, funds he largely channeled away from personal gain. The nonprofit organization focused on 2 crucial areas. Firstly, it provided scholarships to talented engineering students from underserved communities, ensuring that brilliance was never stifled by lack of opportunity. Secondly, it funded research into sustainable materials and resilient engineering techniques, pushing the boundaries of bridge design to withstand future environmental challenges and human follies. Elias spent much of his time personally advising these young scholars, instilling in them his philosophy of integrity, patience, and profound respect for both nature and human life. He also became a sought-after speaker at universities, his lectures on the Cedar Creek collapse serving as a sobering yet inspiring case study on the critical importance of listening to experience and resisting the allure of shortcuts. One sun-drenched autumn afternoon, a gentle breeze stirring the colorful leaves, Elias stood on the newly completed Cedar Creek Bridge. Its sleek, modern design blended seamlessly with the rugged beauty of the Appalachians, a perfect fusion of form and function. The steel gleamed, the concrete flowed in graceful curves, and the foundations, anchored deep into the riverbed according to Elias's original specifications, felt unyielding. Beside him stood Jake Riley, now a project manager for a promising young engineering firm, his face alight with pride. With them was a group of young students from the Thorne Legacy Foundation, their faces upturned, eyes wide with fascination as Elias explained the bridge's design principles. Among them was a bright-eyed girl named Clara, no older than 10, who carefully placed a small, meticulously crafted model of the bridge, made from popsicle sticks and glue, onto the polished concrete railing. It was a humble offering, yet it radiated the innocent hope of future builders. Elias looked at the model, then at Clara, then at the vast, enduring structure they stood upon. He saw not just the physical bridge, but the invisible bonds of trust, experience, and knowledge that now spanned the community. The town of Cedar Creek was connected once more, not just by steel and concrete, but by a renewed faith in integrity and the enduring power of a single, steadfast voice. He turned to the eager young faces. "Remember," Elias said, his voice soft but clear, carrying across the gentle hum of the bridge. A bridge isn't just about connecting 2 points. It's about connecting people. It's about the trust between those who design it, those who build it, and those who use it every day. And the strongest foundations, he tapped the concrete railing gently, aren't always visible. They're built on honesty, on patience, and on listening to the whispers of wisdom, no matter where they come from. As the sun began to dip below the mountain peaks, casting long golden shadows across the Redwater River, Elias Thorne stood on his enduring legacy. The new Cedar Creek Bridge, solid and unyielding, was more than just an engineering marvel. It was a monument to vindication, to the power of truth, and to the quiet, unwavering spirit of the old man who had built it. Twice. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that true integrity builds foundations that last, and that even the quietest voices can move mountains, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.